Why are finance professionals burning out faster than ever? What is performance punishment? And is it happening in my team without me even realising it?
And I'm going to go all out, and there's a couple of gears that I've never tapped into before, and I went for it, and and the success over the first few years was brilliant, and it kept being brilliant, and then you get almost addicted to that success, and then you keep sort of ignoring the signs. You then don't focus on, even when you're trying to switch off, you're not really switching off. So then
Meet Javed, finance recruiter and mental health first aid trainer. After years thriving in corporate life and learning the hard way how passion can tip into burnout, Javed made it his mission to change the conversation around mental health at work.
Here's a grouping of questions you need to go ask them, and you need to go ask them directly, because if you fall in the same trap again and again, then that's as much on you. It's not a journey you want to go on, but a lot of people do, because they're glorifying overworking, or they don't want to speak up, or they're in the wrong culture environment, or they've got stigma in their own head about they don't want to speak up.
That everywhere is a revolving door now. People don't stay anywhere longer than 2 years anymore, but why not? Why are we not staying? If you manage people or you're serious about your own well-being, this is one that you can't afford to miss.
Javed, thank you so much for joining me today. Obviously we've just been having a little bit of a chat. We've been speaking probably for about 5 or 6 years, haven't we?
Yeah.
On and off. But if you wouldn't mind, could you give the listeners just a quick sort of intro into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Look, it's glad to bring this to life sort of between us. Yeah, I think it was pre-COVID. It's over 5 years that we first started chatting, when we got on our respective sort of journeys as business owners. So yeah, it doesn't matter. I manage Javed. And some of you may be surprised, bearing in mind that Phoebe is a recruiter at Finance Recruiter herself, that I'm also a finance recruiter. I'm co-founder of If Talent. But over the last 5 years, I also set up a non-profit called F Mental Health. And I set that up, I guess, for two main reasons. And it was on the back of me sort of leaving the corporate world when my own mental health wasn't where it needed to be, and sort of thinking back and going, I want to do sort of have more purpose in my life. So yeah, and mental health is a big purpose and passion of mine. So through the mental health non-profit work, I sort of deliver mental health training, provide one-on-one support to accountants. I go into finance teams and workplaces to talk about mental health and well-being and resilience. And yeah, like I said, adds a lot more sort of purpose to my week. But obviously the recruitment side pays the bills, but this side gives me purpose and a good balance to my week sort of as a whole. So yeah, that's a bit of an overview.
Lovely. And I think that's where we all want to be, right? We want that purpose day to day. I think we're seeing that a lot more in the people that we register, aren't we? That all the other boxes are getting ticked. It's where am I finding that purpose? And I think that's probably what we want to kind of delve into, I suppose, is why this conversation that we're about to have, why it matters right now. Because I think especially in finance, which is a space that we both operate in, we find that like stress, anxiety, burnout are at an all-time high. Mm-hmm. And I think that probably, I don't know about you, Javed, but the majority of the people that I register are in a bit of a bad way, if I'm honest. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're finding that and why you think that might be the case.
I noticed it for a number of years, and that's just by virtue of the fact that I started getting very invested in mental health, and specifically amongst accountants and finance people, sort of over 5 years ago. So, around the time when we first sort of started chatting, really, and, taking my time when I left the corporate world, and, as well as me focusing on my own recovery and everything else, there was this piece of, look, where do I want to go with my, with my work career and my work life? Because I had all the success, and, it was, that wasn't giving me the fulfillment it wanted. So, yes, as a personal driver, but something that I completely then, took me a little bit by surprise is I started looking at, okay, well, how can I raise mental health awareness and, within finance? So you start digging and doing some research. And there's these surveys that go back from pre-2015. So you're not talking, we're talking about recent. And then, started looking at statistics around stress, anxiety, and burnout. And, the numbers don't lie. And these surveys are from EY, PwC, Indeed, all manner of, or CIPD, reputable organisations, that year on year these surveys are coming out and say, look, it's, it is sort of really high. And those numbers don't seem to be sort of coming down either. And whilst there's been a lot of positives in the post-COVID world around, bringing the conversation forward. I mean, we wouldn't have been doing this conversation pre-2019, pre-2020. So there are positives, but ultimately the numbers are still high. And I think, if you're thinking of why that might be the case, I think if you take almost the history of a finance team, whether you're a finance director or finance manager or even someone working in a transactional part qualified role, probably showing my age years, I've been doing recruitment in finance for well over 20 years. And the traditional stereotype of an accountant, Dave or Susan sat in sort of accounts, their role was very much around, accurate record of transactions and the bookkeeping, doing the month end, a very high level of sort of profit and loss, and then just make sure the accounts were published, sent to the accountant. So it was very much an important role, but that's almost what it was. But then the influence of finance has grown in the last 20 years significantly, and all of a sudden business owners and leaders and and even accountants themselves. So naturally, I've got more skills than just sort of producing numbers. I can bring them to life. I can add more commercial insight. I can support the board and leadership team. I can support non-finance stakeholders to make better decisions. And then what has happened is the role and the influence of the finance function has just grown and grown and grown. And then obviously the exec board and stakeholders have realised that. So all of a sudden, finance has gone from this side function to then slowly becoming the heartbeat of every organisation. And then you then look at how finance functions are different now to what they were 20 years ago. So you now have a lot more expansive finance functions that have, analysts, commercial finance people, FP&A individuals. It isn't just the accountants that are doing the month end and the year end anymore. So you've got this sort of almost classic melting pot of influence increases, the importance increases, but then at the same time the demands have increased. So then you absolutely can go to finance for this now and go to finance for that now. If you think over the last 10 years, robotics, automation, AI, transformation, so others in finance and IT have now come close together. So you've now got this much bigger remit. So you start looking and taking a step back and go, wow, the role of an accountant and a finance team was just transformed, and it's unrecognisable to what it was a couple of decades ago, even 10 years ago.
Even 10 years, yeah. I was going to say I've been doing this for 12 years now, and when I started, I wouldn't even know what commercial finance was. That wasn't recent term. You wouldn't know what a finance business partner was or a finance analyst. It wasn't a thing. I think the first time I started to come across these terms was probably, I want to say around 2017, 2018, it started to become that new kind of kid on the block.
Yeah.
These new sexy roles that everybody suddenly wanted. And I think there is that balance, isn't there, of people still want these roles. They don't want the more traditional as a side function.
Yes.
They want to be valuable. They want to be wanted and needed in the business, which is, I think, probably just how we're wired as people, isn't it? But at the same time, it's then, well, maybe that's then why burnout is so common in finance, because we're having to be everything. I say we, like I'm a finance person.
Yeah.
These finance people, they're having to be so much more, aren't they? And I think and I'd love to get your take on this, because I was reading something the other day, and I thought burnout can be a little bit of a buzzword sometimes, can't it? And a lot of people can fling around burnout as a word, and actually how that shows in its most serious sense, how that shows up for people who are seriously burnt out is very different to one of my mates who spends her day working in beach clubs in Dubai, and she's voice noting me like, I'm so burnt out, and I'm like, you're not. Like it can be a bit of a buzzword, but like I think that was it. Sorry, I was listening to this podcast, and it was saying about how if we're in roles that are truly, if we're in our flow state and we're in a role where we're absolutely loving what we do, then we don't burn out. And I don't know how true obviously speaking to somebody who has experience, like their mental health be impacted because of what's going on at work. Do you think of that? Do you think if you are doing work that you truly love, that you're less likely to burn out, or are you more likely to because you don't know how to start?
I think, to my experience over the last few years compared to the previous decade, where, I've gone through the sort of burnout sort of cycle and come out the other side. I think if you can find sort of purpose, and I've talked about, I've mentioned purpose a couple of times. You find purpose, and what that means is going to vary from one person to to another. Now, you can find that purpose, in your job or outside of work, but doing a role in a job that you love, for a company you love, for a line manager that you love, within a team where you're locked in and brought in and engaged, 100% you will, and people just need to look back at, there'll be companies they work for, or teams or individuals, and how they felt at that environment where they felt safe, secure, the manager's got their back, and there's that sort of culture. Like, you move heavy, you'll run through brick walls, and your output and productivity just will go sky high. So you can arguably be, not arguably, a fact, you'd be more productive and effective in those environments. You're right. So I think finding that purpose and the right, I'd say also culture sort of aligned within there. I think to your point around, can you end up overworking and over dedicating? Yes, you can. And that's where you can't just say, oh, it's about the line manager or company or culture. Like, you've got to work on yourself, and that bit around, do you have healthy boundaries? You know how to sort of when to say no, and what are you doing to rest and recuperate to make sure that you're maintaining your well-being on a regular basis, not just waiting until you're up against it. Because for anyone who's gone through burnout and true burnout, that is a persistent level of not just pressure, but relentless pressure and stress. And your stress contain overflowing for a significant period of time. Like, you're talking that, stress and anxiety and everything have literally sort of taken a near permanent hold, but that's then gone on. You're talking months and months and months, if not longer, where true burnout sort of takes place. And there's, I've done workshops on burnout, and that sort of cycle, there's not a set timeline, but you're talking a long time, like, because the complete disconnection and sort of and what happens when you get through those last stages of burnout is a journey. It's not a journey you want to go on, but a lot of people do, because they're glorifying overworking, or they don't want to speak up, or they're in the wrong culture environment, or they've got stigma in their own head about they don't want to speak up, and that's what I did. I didn't speak up, and then it was too late. And I know there's plenty of others that have done the same.
I think as well, I just don't know whether, because people do throw around this term burnout, I don't know whether it's taken as seriously as it should be, because, like you say, true burnout is, they say, don't they, stress is the biggest killer. Like, it's so serious. How do we know how can someone listening to this know whether they, part of me thinks you just know, but maybe some people don't, and that's how they get there. So how could you, as someone that's been on that journey, were there any warning signs? Was there anything that you should have paid attention to sooner, or wish you did?
Yeah, and I've compared notes with others, when I've spoken to accountants over the last few years as well, and, we're talking about mental health in finance. This is a human sort of problem. If someone happens to be listening to this and doesn't have to be in finance, it will find it relatable. But if I think back and, some of the early telltale signs, I loved my last role in the corporate world, and I went all in, and it was at that sort of time where, in fairness, I started that role on the backdrop of, another period in my life where my mental health had reached sort of rock bottom. But then that my purpose at the time, and it's obviously changed now, was right, I've got this role within starting an office from scratch, and, a sense of building and growing something, and I'm going to call out. And there's a couple of gears that I've never tapped into before, and I went for it. And and the success over the first few years was brilliant, and it kept being brilliant. And then you get almost addicted to that success, and the adulation and the promotions and the pay and everything else that comes with it. And you grow in a team, and you're absolutely sort of smashing it. And then you probably become a bit complacent. So you choose to ignore the signs, because you go, well, it'll be fine. Everything's, look at all this I'm doing. And then you keep sort of ignoring the signs. You then don't focus on, even when you're trying to switch off, you're not really switching off. So then the overworking comes into play, and you just keep going. And then the complacency then leads into perhaps sort of habits and coping mechanisms that you wouldn't really go to. Specifically, I think if I think back to another part of my experience, I think when I was getting a lot of the success that I wasn't feeling as fulfilled and happy about it, and which is interesting. So, fell into the conditional happiness traps. I'll be happy when I reach this level, that level, and I kept reaching, and I was feeling nothing. And then that begins to grow. It's like, well, why am I not getting all the joy and happiness from this? Then you go and try and find joy and happiness through other choices, and some of those choices weren't great, and I've talked about sort of turning to recreational drugs and alcohol, and and then having a really bad relationship sort of with those, and then you then suppress emotions, you don't talk about it, you don't want to share, and I had a lot of self-stigma in my mind, where the culture and environment wasn't conducive. I felt I had a lot to lose if I ended up sort of sharing it. So you've just got this sort of a lot of intertwining factors that are coming into play, and then you compensate even more with your job to think, well, that's the only way sort of forward, because work was still going well. So in here it wasn't, but work was still going well. So and then you then hit a stage where you just have a complete emotional detachment and disconnection from reality, and then that's when it does come crashing down like a house of cards. And when you speak to people who go through this sort of journey where they're having the success and they're working hard and have it, but they're not feeling that sort of joy, and that's where it can come from. For others, it's just more a case of, look, there's life events and things that have gone on in their work, life outside of work, or things that are happening in that work environment where, a bad boss or a bad culture, so many things that, factors that can influence our mental health at any given time. And not overlooking the fact that, as adults, our background and upbringing shapes a lot of our mental health. You go into a work environment and there are many line managers in finance and outside where they almost think, oh, well, if you're coming in, you're just, this concept of my whole self doesn't compute with a lot of line managers. Like, well, no, you just do what's needed and what's required, and it doesn't really matter about what may be going on outside of work, but you do whatever it takes, because, your output is, is really important. So, yeah, there's a lot to unpick there, but I guess hopefully gives you some, various strands of snippets of why.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think so. The first one that jumped out to me there then was those earliest signs. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm keen to do is, someone's listening to this, and that just rang a bell, and they thought, that's me at whatever point. So I suppose what you've just shown us is like a timeline of how it might begin and where it might go. And I actually felt that within myself then, because I will hold my hands up. I'm at a point right now where, and we've just been talking about it, I've got 5 weeks left in the business before I go on maternity leave. So my current thought is time is running out. And so I sit there at night time with my laptop, and I'm not really doing anything important, but I'm just on my laptop. Mm-hmm. And I'm just, even if I'm cleansing data in the CRM, and it's not important, it's not needed, I could be reading a book, but I can't read a book because I'll get a book and I'm thinking about work. And that's, you just mentioned that, and I thought, oh God, that's kind of where I am right now. Now, I know I've got 6 months off in, but it's not off, is it? When I'm sure anyone that's got children will tell me I'm not getting 6 months off. I've got 6 months of doing something different. Out of work in 5 weeks' time. But if I didn't have that coming up, I would probably start thinking, I think I'd probably start to feel like I'm going to need a break at some point. I'm going to need to take some time for me. I need to nip this in the bud. I'd have that guilt starting to creep in that I know that this isn't good for me, and I'm doing it a little bit. So yeah, it jumped out to me there that, oh, yeah, I think it's very easy to fall into that trap. And I was speaking to an FC the other day she's been with the business she's at for 7 years. And the expectation, basically she's doing two people's jobs and she can't get sign off for another head in the team for various reasons. So she's consistently working 70 hours a week. And she made a comment and she said, when I do get some time where I don't have to work, I don't know what to do with myself. So I work. And I thought, oh God, like so many people must be about those early signs. If someone's listening to this and they're thinking, oh yeah, I'm there right now, what can they start to, what would you advise them?
I think the first thing is absolutely not to keep things to yourself. So I think it's the single biggest issue I think pretty much most have, and there's almost still a reluctance, whether it's stigma or otherwise, to speak up earlier. Now, easier said than done, I know, because I've defined stigma as self-stigma in terms of, what's stopping you because of the thoughts, in your head. But there's also then the societal stigma that exists. Also, if someone sort of sat there going, who do I turn to? Their line manager may not be the right person for one reason or another.
To interject, I did say this to her. Have you not mentioned this to the CFO?
Yeah.
So what the CFO does is he then starts to say, right, well, let's strip back your role. Let's take some things off you. What then gets taken off her is the stuff she really wants to be doing. And with the lower level stuff that she shouldn't really be doing, and she should probably have a finance manager. She ends up sort of looking after the transactional team and she needs someone else. So on that note, obviously, if your manager wants to try and be helpful and strip back your role and you're thinking, no, that's not what I need. It's hard there, isn't it? 'Cause it's like,
it is.
Who do you talk to?
One of the big, if you ask people in finance, there's barely a finance team out there that's optimally resourced.
Yeah.
And the bigger the team, then the more chances there are. And there's always that thing where every employer, they almost like will try and get the absolute most out of individuals and their sort of respective teams. But I won't want to put a number on it, but I'd say at least 2/3, if not 3/4 of finance teams aren't optimally resourced for one reason or another. And as a result, people are then doing more than one person's job. And then you add that to, we talked about things earlier about the influence of finance and roles and how that's increased. And you then put in month end or project deadlines and other, any other requests that are coming in, that's one of the reasons why people, are sort of, do end up sort of struggling with their mental health, and stress levels over a period of time. There was a phrase I heard, sort of in recent times, and it's called performance punishment. And your FC probably sounds, prime, where you're very good at what you do and you're very capable. So what the business and or your line manager will do is I'll add more, because you're capable, potentially even willing to sort of do it. You keep doing that, eventually, something's going to give. But look, there's two issues there. The issue is then on the team and the culture and the line manager. But then the other is also then the individuals not able or not having the confidence or doesn't know how to sort of say no. But then some in more recent times are just walking, say, look, I'll go find another job and where I am more valued and appreciated and I'm not doing 1.5 or 2 people's jobs at the same time, because working longer hours is one of the big sort of issues within finance and why stress and anxiety continue to remain sort of quite high. Could easily do a survey and you'll find that, a majority are working at least 50 hours plus a week, at least.
Yeah.
And you can probably add another 5-10 hours and still have a high number.
It's the conversation with most people I register. And actually that was another thing that this particular FC said, but it comes with the territory, doesn't it? That's what she said. And I was like, no, that's the culture, isn't it? How many people have you heard say that? It comes with I don't mind doing long hours. It comes with the territory. It's expected at this level. It shouldn't be. That's where we're going seriously wrong. And I think on that note, just like sort of like dipping into the cultural shift.
Yeah.
That would need to happen. obviously a lot of people that listen to this will be not just leading finance teams, they might just be leading teams, or they might be part of a team. What do we think that needs to look like, and where can we start with? I think it takes a lot of self-awareness, I think, for anybody here to really look at your own team and your own input. And maybe, this whole thing of performance punishment, I love that, because I didn't know that there was a phrase for it. And how many times do we see that? But how many times do we also see the CFO or whoever's been piling on this pressure turn around and say, hang on, but you wanted progression. I thought you wanted opportunities to learn more. You've been wanting this, and then it's when it gets too much. So I think you mentioned earlier about having conversations. I think that's probably where we can be starting, with a lot of this. I think a lot of people are still worried about maybe saying the wrong thing, or it feeling a bit forced, or not wanting to open a can of worms. So where do you think we can start? What would make a difference?
Yeah, I think over many years now, I've when I'm sort of trying to speak to contacts or just reach out to them, asking the question, where are you at when it comes to mental health for your team? Quite an open question, and it's probably not a question that comes from a recruiter, but just that it is an area, as you know, is a big passion of mine. And I get varying degrees of responses, but the ones that are the real sort of ones that still take me by surprise, and I still get these responses saying, "No, it's not my job. That's just that's HR's job." And it still sort of happens. And then the other one, which you don't get as often, but I've had ones that say, well, "Look, I've worked through, 2-3 major sort of recessions. The worst one I heard is we can't all be a snowflake. Because of what I've gone through, that means I expect others to, to be able to cope and manage the same. But I think what you've got to realize is the norms and what was expected in the sort of 80s and 90s, and to a degree in the noughties, aren't the norms and expected sort of now. So just because you went through that, it wasn't right for you either. But ultimately, the culture and the workplace just wasn't set up for what it is sort of now. So I think
it does look different, doesn't it, with each generation, and it'll be particularly strong in some areas, but those areas will be different for each.
Yeah, and for line managers, it's more around, I think, especially within finance, you'll get promoted first and foremost because of your ability to do the job and your technical proficiency. Not rarely, unless it comes naturally to you, will it be because of your human qualities. And I'm more talking about how, the ability to sort of show sort of empathy and have those conversations. And it isn't about, I do mental health training for line managers and individuals. It's not about you becoming an expert in mental health or becoming a therapist. But if someone came to you and they were struggling, would you know how to have, an effective enough conversation for that person to feel that they feel supported, they've got the back, and then you can then signpost them in the right directions. It's not you having the answers. It's just having a human first to your sort of approach as a line manager. And I think that's where there is still a heck of a lot to do sort of in financing. And that's why I think there's still some reluctance across the board where someone's thinking, there's no chance I'd go to my line manager. I've seen how they have been in interactions generally, because we're all observing, right? And we're seeing how our bosses are and how they're interacting with other people. And there are many instances going, oh, well, I've seen how they were with X or Y and how they react in certain situations. Well, I'm not coming to them. And even down to things like, I don't want to come to them, not just because I'm struggling or maybe even if I made a mistake, because, there could be a culture and environment where, you get called out for it. And we know many environments like that as well. So I think that just there's a lot more sort of awareness around what training can line managers do and what can businesses do. And yes, HR, and to then support line managers in finance to become more emotionally intelligent and sort of leaders that then mean that you can then have sort of a lot more conversations with your team, not just around their outputs, but their overall sort of well-being and how they are. And there's one example I always put. There's a CFO that I know, and he has the one-to-ones, but in the monthly one-to-one, he puts everything to one side, work thing, and he goes, I'm not talking about a single thing at work until I know everything about, how you are and what's truly going on and how are you really, and, and literally a well-being one-to-one and conversation. And then only that we've got that sort of talked about, but then we'll talk about work. Not the, how are you, Phoebe? Yeah, I'm fine. Do right. Fun things a bit struggle, but okay, well, we'll deal with that later. But anyway, let's talk about sort of our numbers and where we're at, etc. There's almost a reluctance, but us through lack of training to how to go about it. So yeah, but have one-to-one conversations, but talk about well-being.
Is the value of, so for those line managers that are saying it's not my job.
Yeah.
So, and you know what? I've never thought this before now. I would have always said I would be quite an emotionally intelligent person, but actually, thinking about it, there's been times where I've sat in a one-to-one with previous employers and they've asked me how I am. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, it's not your problem. Like, I come to work, I'm not going to tell you all my life dramas. So I won't share because it's not work. And I'll share what's going on at work. If there's a problem at work, I'll share it, but not anything going on at home. Yet the stuff at home will probably impact my performance. So for those line managers who are thinking, it's not my problem. I'm here to make sure they perform at work. What's the value in it being their problem? Why should it be? We need to convince them.
Yeah, I think we do, and I think I guess one of the ways you could, they should be looking at it is if you want the best out of your team. So if you look at it purely from an output point of view, if you want them to be more productive, and to be at their best, their most innovative with ideas, ultimately, which then also makes you look good, then, you've got to, it's, the well-being and, and that whole piece then becomes, something that's a win-win for them and for you. So this isn't about something that's going to take away from their performance and output, but like I said, for your progression as a manager, to move up there, your development, for you to get the kudos and your pay rise and your promotion and everything else, it's you're relying. Yeah, exactly. And I think if the penny can drop that way, then that might hopefully then people can take a step back as line manager and go, actually, no, right, I need to do this. If you don't know how, that's fine, but at least have an acceptance of reality. Actually, it'd be good for me as well as good for them. And to my point earlier in our sort of in this podcast, that think back to the teams you've worked in, and I think there's a couple of line managers and teams that I've worked in where the line manager I felt supported. I felt that they were a good mentor. They had my back. They just created this sort of culture and environment where I really wanted to be there, and it was enjoyable. The team culture, and we've all had them. Hopefully, people have had at least more than one, but at least one. Just think how that made you feel, and I said before, like you'll run from brick walls to them, and you'll sort of go that extra mile. And yeah, you'll may log in a bit later through choice, etc. But it's not feeling like a chore. It's not because it's an implied culture where, well, if I don't, then I'm going to be, it's going to be seen as a negative. Like you're doing it because you want to. And I was speaking to a CFO this week because they're about to hire a new position as a number 2 to him, and he was talking about an individual within the team where there's almost sort of similar traits where he was saying that she logged on a beach, away, and he was like, what you do, like, don't need to do that. And she said, look, honestly, you're absolutely fine, because throughout the course of the year when she's working, there's been situations where she's needed time out or whatever it is, and the CFO's gone, you just do what you need to, because I 100% trust that your outputs and everything else, and that thing, well, I know you've always got my back, and this needs doing. I've absolutely no problem. I'll get that done. Now, I'm not saying everyone should work from the beach on holiday, but she absolutely was comfortable doing it because of how her manager has made her feel at other times regularly. And that's where, both the individual and the line manager and the company benefit. So I think get trained, and, if you don't know how, and getting that support to become a good, even better line manager than you are, and know that it's only going to benefit you and everyone involved.
And I also think as well, I think sometimes we can shy away from conversations because we're worried to say the wrong thing. We're worried that our delivery will be wrong. And so we don't say something, or pussyfoot around it and dilute the message. We won't actually get anything out of what we've said because we're just too almost embarrassed to talk about it. And I think the only way we get better at something is by putting the reps in. So you've just got to try. And the first few times you ask those questions, you might feel really awkward. You might cringe. You might make the other person cringe. You might feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But you've got to go through that to get on the other side and get better, I suppose, at having conversations. It's a funny one because we think, these people will have donkey's years of experience as leaders, yet just asking a question can feel so uncomfortable. So, there's always that ongoing development, isn't there? There's always stuff we can be doing to get better. And I think in this day and age, this is what every leader needs to be looking at, getting better, getting stronger with.
Definitely.
There's the other kind of, not problem, but what the older generations will perceive as a problem in 2025, are we in? Yeah. Is that everywhere is a revolving door now. People don't stay anywhere longer than 2 years anymore. But why not? Why are we not staying? Because we're getting burnt out and then being like, right, on to the next thing where I won't feel burnt out. And then the cycle continues. I think we see, how often do we see as recruiters? There's one lady that springs to mind who gets burnt out everywhere she goes. She starts somewhere new. It starts off nice and she's enjoying it. And then she takes on more. The problem isn't where she is. The problem is she can't say no. The problem is she has no boundaries. Actually, she goes looking for it because I think there's something deep within her that makes her feel valuable and, makes her feel needed. And so she goes looking for the stress, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, it may be a case of, if you're listening to this, it might not be if you're trying to think, right, who is this on? It might not be on your employer, it might be on you.
Always, even I've interesting. Well, part of my burnout workshop, I've got a slide, and it starts with a controversial statement. Where burnout, are you the problem? And it's exactly your point, Phoebe, around that it may not be necessarily the company. So on that particular example is around, right, someone, they just need to get support to have a self-awareness to understand, right, how can I create sort of better boundaries, etc. Because if you keep doing that, then that's not healthy for you, and it's then not healthy for future companies. And also when it comes to then you doing interviews, you almost feel like you're spending half the interview sort of justifying moves, etc. So that there has to be some personal accountability. I think where there's been anyone been in a situation where it's been a line manager or a company culture environment that's caused it, which absolutely does exist, then my encouragement, when people have come to me, I always said, look, and this is at any level, right? If that's happened because of certain things that around those factors, you need to ask some questions in your next interview process to ensure that you are not going into a similar environment again. And if it was an environment where you were working sort of constantly 60 hours a week, or the always on culture, or vastly it was under resourced and doing X amount of people's jobs, or a line manager that just wasn't sort of supportive, and didn't have that emotional intelligence, then you should be interviewing them on some of these questions. And the only way you can minimize the risk, you can't negate it, of make sure you don't go into that same environment, is then taking that accountability. And I've given there's a grouping of questions based on what someone shares. Right, here's a grouping of questions, you need to go ask them, and you need to go ask them directly, because if you fall in the same trap again and again, then that's as much on you, because you're not doing the due diligence, because there are some company cultures out there that aren't for turning, and it's just going to be too much and over a long period of time. But you can take some personal accountability so that you don't fall into the same trap. But that's where interviews have changed in the last few years, where it should be a two-way street, and you need to ask a company around cultures and environments and what they do about well-being and everything else. So don't be shy of asking these types of questions, because a company that's proud and do good things will absolutely share that. The ones who don't, or sidestep, or where it's just all buzzwords, you'll quickly find them out, and then all of a sudden there's your red flag that tells you, I'm sorry, but I don't want to work in that. Thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to company X instead, because the responses to the same questions I got a lot more confidence from.
I think especially now, as we touched on earlier, it's that whole thing around purpose is really important right now, but well-being as well. And I think it's where a lot of businesses can really stand out and get the best talent in the market through, one, like what purpose is a very personal thing, isn't it? And it's different for everybody and some people. And actually, I found it interesting. I put a post on my LinkedIn about side hustles, but basically it's more like hobbies. Like the accountants a lot of the accountants that I know, obviously they're in this super logical job, and a lot of them have like creative outlets on the side, and some of them sell those things, or I've spoken to a lot of people who have these little side hustle things going on, or different ways to express like creativity, but other ways to find purpose, I suppose. So not every business can go out there and give somebody purpose. That's a personal thing, but what you can do is support that purpose or support people's well-being. So it's and it can also be, you might work in a business and you might think, oh, I'm never gonna get all this stuff signed off. Well, it doesn't have to be stuff that needs signing off. It can be, every team has its own culture, and what do you do in your team? So I think we've already said, haven't we, before recording this, that we're probably going to have to do a follow-up, because there's so much we wanted to talk about. I suppose how recruiters can influence and how recruiters can help, I suppose. Obviously we haven't had a chance to touch on that, so it would be interesting to know whether anyone wants us to do a little bit of a follow-up session, but there's a few things that I want to, a few kind of like quick fire things I just want to ask you, just off the top of your head. 3 questions I wrote down. So if you don't mind. So the first one was, one mental health myth that you wish would die out.
That there isn't someone or persons or around you that want to help and support. So if it's not someone in your workplace or your line manager, it's someone outside of work. If it's not your loved one, you can go to, I'm a Samaritans Listening volunteer, but it's that thing in your mind that when you're really struggling, that I feel like I've got no one to turn to and I need to keep it to myself. So they're probably both those things combined. Like,
you've read a look for me, I think this.
You've just got to have the power of one conversation. Like, you've got to just
right on the street.
Yeah, it could be anyone. So yeah, I think just speak out and just find an outlet to have that conversation and not keep it bottled up inside. Because you're definitely not alone.
Yeah. Number 2, a small habit that helps you reset. We didn't even touch on your habits, and I wanted to. So that then will be a follow-up. Yeah,
so it's a good habit that helps me. It's something the links really. So I do breath work in the morning. So, and I've now noticed that is a big thing for me. That helps me sort of start my day sort of particularly well.
And do you do that every single day? Are you?
Yeah.
That disciplined with it?
Yeah, so in last I started doing breath work around last year, and I did it for pockets before then. But for me, I was trying to do meditation, but it was always in the evening. But the breath work, because without going into too much detail, like I suffer from low moods. I can wake up sort of feeling sad for no reason whatsoever, and that's quite a regular thing. And that's why I've had quite regular bouts of depression, because I almost feel like my day's starting that I'm well behind. Where everyone is, like almost starting a race, a 200-meter race, and people 100 meters ahead already. So yeah, this flip of just doing sort of, that sort of morning breath work. But the other one that is a bit underrated, I try and find micro moments in the day. So, and this is for busy people in particular. So for example, let's say you've driven somewhere before you get out of the car, or you've just driven home before you get out of the car. Just literally just have a moment to yourself, just close your eyes, just sort of breathe, and just try and sort of block everything out. Just for 1 or 2 minutes to do it. Before I joined your podcast, sort of added it so you can do it before meetings, and just, so this thing where we're too busy and everything, I think try and find sort of micro sort of moments, where, and whether it's sort of things where you're doing sort of literally just close your eyes and being sort of a bit more mindful, and just try and fill your days with a few micro moments, and that could sort of help you just sort of rebalance and a bit of reset sort of within there. Just sort of close your eyes and try and switch off, I think. But it's like a muscle, like you keep doing it, it will sort of, it will help.
Yeah, I love that. I think maybe for anybody listening to this, then if they've got this far, they owe it to themselves when this finishes, just to sit there, set a time of 2 minutes.
Yeah,
just
that's it.
My dad once told me to do that. I mean, my dad's he does not worry. He just does not worry. He has no years. He's a fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy. Like, he just, no dramas in his life. And I was once having a very bad day. I think I'd had a resignation from one of my team, and something else had happened, and I was just feeling so overwhelmed. And I had to walk out the office, and I called my dad. I thought, I need him to rub off on me right now. He said, "Right, this is what you need to do." He said, "Go and sit in your car, lock the doors." He said, "Put your timer on your phone for 5 minutes, shut your eyes, breathe, and then ring me back." I was like, right, okay. So, and if that's not working, what I want you to do is, at the top of your lungs, I want you to make a noise like a cockerel, and then I want you to ring me back. I was like,
right.
Okay. So he put the phone down on me, and I sat in the car, and I just burst out laughing.
Yeah.
Oh, he wanted me to do like the Peter Pan, like cockadoodle dip at the top of my lungs. And I thought, do you know what? If I did that right now, it would probably really cheer me up.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think just take yourself out, and that's why this is so great. The micro moments. That's why it's so great, because you're just stepping out of the hustle and bustle of everything that's going on, just bringing yourself back to the present moment. And if you're stressed or whatever, even if you're not stressed, just you realize actually nothing really matters. Like,
yeah.
So yeah, no, that I love that. I'm going to do that after we finish. Not the cockerel sound. Just
just micro moment.
Yeah. Last question. What's one book or quote that stuck with you?
It's probably a couple of books that I can think of. But there's a book called Lost Connections that I've read a couple of times, and it's author's Johann Hari.
Oh, I love him.
And he's done something else about stolen focus as well. It was about how, So
listened to actually.
So it's basically when your mental health is not where it needs to be, and depression or whatever is just sort of completely taken hold. It's basically trying to not dissuade you, but basically look away from medication being your answer, because there's a lot of murky history around how antidepressants came to market. But basically, look at, and the book basically looks at, and you heavily research about looking at every component of your life, to then explore, right, okay, what is it that's sort of causing it? And as I said, is it work? Or is it something outside of work? If it's outside of work, is it sort of relational, or is it sort of more social or friendship, whatever it might be? So it's looking every component of your life, and and then understanding what the cause sort of really is, rather than papering over the cracks with medication, and then just then encourages you to do that sort of soul searching to then figure out what's right, and then do something about it. And is it about changing job, or dare I say, look, if it's if it is a relationship that you're in, or whatever it might be, is then to make a decision, because the reason you're feeling that way, and as you are, is there is something that's, or a combination of things aren't right.
Sometimes we jump to the conclusion that it's work, don't we? It might not be. So
it might not. So it's doing that sort of almost, full scale sort of overview of every element of your life, and you will find where probably then the bravery is that have you got the courage and the bravery to then take the next steps to do something about it. So, and both those steps are really important. But no, it's a book that was well written, a real sort of eye-opener. I know others have felt the same about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a really great recommendation. I listened to him on a podcast actually, and then been on to listen to Stolen Focus as the audio.
Yeah.
And then I'm yet to listen to Lost Connections actually. I've got a list that I'm hoping to get to at some point, so I will get it on there. One of the books on my list actually, you mentioned something earlier and I wondered if you'd read it, The Body Keeps the Score. Have you read that one? It's about how stress can show up and manifest as
physical.
Body, it's physical. So that might be one. And when I've read that one.
Yeah, no, it has, it rings a bell. Not that I've read it, but and we haven't talked about the link between physical and mental health and how it shows up. But then again, we don't make the full connection. But yes, definitely let me know. I'll, definitely be looking. Sounds good.
Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work with like mental health first aid and recruitment? Where can people find you?
Yeah, it's I guess sort of I do live on LinkedIn, sort of, and have been a lot more public in the last few years. So absolutely, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find sort of both the websites, but there is the non-profit website fmentalhealth.org, and I guess it's more of a staging page that gives a bit of an overview in terms of what I do around the training and talks and Q&As and panels and podcasts like these. But yeah, I go into workplaces regularly, a few times a month, and it's a part that I really enjoy. So whether it's an individual or a line manager or workplace, whatever the size of the company, I've done everything from charities, non-profits, SMEs to FTSEs. It's the conversation is sort of is needed across any type of organisation. So you're welcome to look on there, and like I said, I post regularly on as well if people want to sort of follow. But yeah, if anyone wants any questions or a sounding board, you're welcome to reach out, because it's an area that does give me a lot of purpose and a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah, and the stuff you post on LinkedIn as well is just really insightful. So I'd recommend everybody go and check it out. I'll pop the link actually to your LinkedIn in the notes. So thank you so much, and
very welcome.
Never know. Hopefully we'll be able to do a follow up.
Yeah, and I'd love to, and see what sort of what the community want. But yeah, I think there's plenty still to talk about. But yeah, no, really enjoyed it, and all the best with with everything and your mat leave.
Same to you. Thank you.
All right.